Welcome to this webinar where we're discussing the heating of buildings, how to reduce carbon emissions, how to ensure that the consumer, that's all of us, is able to make the changes necessary if we're to reduce the emissions from our homes and achieve the net zero target that is our goal by 2050. My name's Chris Davis. I'm a former member of the European Parliament's Environment Committee and a senior advisor with Wood Pedersen Public Affairs in Brussels. Let me introduce my guests. Paola Pino, now Director with DG Energy. Oh, an incredibly long title, Paola. Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation. Well, okay, well, we get the picture, I think. I think your job is to save the world. Who else? Yes, Giuseppe Larubio, from the Public Affairs Director from the Ariston Group, major manufacturers, major European manufacturers of boilers and heat pumps and other heating equipment. From the Association of the European Heating Industry, Federica Sabatti, Secretary General, and I'll be coming to Federica in a moment, and her colleague, Vele Bielets, Head of Technology at the European Heating Industry. Federica, let me just turn to you. Just say a few words about EHI. And what's your role here?
Yes, thank you, Chris. The European heating industry is basically an industry association that brings together the manufacturers, the bigger manufacturers in Europe of heating systems. And when I say heating systems, I mean really all the technologies from the heat pumps to the boilers to the micro CHP, the solar thermal fuel cells. So really, we have the whole. Not a single technology, and therefore one can say we are really the provider of the technologies for the energy transition, which is the big topic of today and in general of these months, specifically for buildings. Obviously, we don't act in a void. Yes, we do provide the technologies, but when it comes to decarbonizing buildings, you don't only need the technologies. You need the energy to be decarbonized. You need the grids, the energy grids. You need the heat demand of buildings to be lowered, so insulation, and you need technologies. Finally, you need also the consumer buy-in, and this is where this event comes in. We have commissioned a study to understand a bit more about the relations between the technologies and the consumer, and see particularly how the consumer chooses a heating system, what he considers, what are the factors that make him choose one technology over the other. Because it's important, it's an important part of the package when we look at decarbonization of buildings. So this is a little bit where the idea behind this event, to make this link and to see also, of course, with policymakers, with the European Commission, what kind of lessons we can draw from the study, and also what the legislation that is in work in progress now can help deliver together with the industry and the technologies.
Thank you. So Vele, you're going to take us through the results of this study, which I think has been carried out by Center Data in the Netherlands, yes, an organisation which I think carries out work for the Commission from time to time too.
Yes, indeed.
So what are the findings?
Oh, there are a lot of findings, but I'll just pick a couple of key elements that came out of it. I'll give you some figures as well, just to be a bit complete. So the first part is that although 60% of the recent buyers thought about replacing their heating appliance with something more efficient, so with a more efficient technology, the vast majority of consumers ultimately purchased the same heating appliance as their old one. As an example of this is that less than 8% of the consumers who were interrogated during the survey replaced a boiler with a heat pump. On the other hand, when we looked at which factors were important for a consumer when he replaces a new heating appliance, so when he chooses that new heating appliance, then they listed the energy consumption, the running cost, and energy efficiency and energy label as the most important aspects. So there is some kind of contradiction between energy consumption, energy efficiency is most important, but they do not replace it with a more efficient technology. The study also points out to a couple of reasons that could be reply to this. The first one is, well, as I said, although energy consumption, running cost, and energy label are listed as the most important aspects, the fourth runner-up in this list of important aspects is the cost. And it might be that at some point, the purchase price and installation cost of an appliance might gain the upper hand above the other three important aspects. Another part could be technology related or lack of awareness. And here I come to one of the findings in the study, which says that a substantial share of the consumer who did not consider different technologies believe they cannot replace their appliance with anything else. So they think they have to replace their appliance with the same technology. This could either be due to technical reasons, such as, for example, the building is not suited for low temperature heating systems. There's insufficient insulation, inappropriate radiator systems. It could be related to space constraint, or there could be a non-technical reason, for example, that they did not have the right information to replace their appliance. But this, I mean, what the exact reason is, we could further investigate, but the study is not conclusive of this, sorry. And then one also important fact is that the consumer study confirms that the installer, the professional installer, plays a very important role. His advice is followed by the large majority, and I'm speaking about over 95% of the consumers follow the advice of the installer, whether it is completely or to some extent. As such, it will be very important to ensure that the installers are properly trained so they can give the right information and install the future-proof heating systems in people's houses. As a conclusion, I think that the study points to several barriers because that causes people to not switch from one heating technology to a more efficient heating technology. And we believe that some of these barriers can be removed, but some will be difficult in the short run. So in order to reach the 2030 targets and decarbonize our heating sector, we will need a coherent regulatory framework which considers not only electricity and electric technologies, but considers multi-technology and multi-energy carriers. I think this is the conclusion of the study and our conclusion as EHI as well, for further discussion, of course.
Well, thank you. That raises a great many questions. You mentioned, for example, that many consumers don't understand whether their building in which they live is capable of being adapted, and yet they also take the advice from the installer. So the role of the installer in giving advice, and presumably the installers have a vested interest in doing what they already know. So that is clearly crucial. That, and obviously the issue of costs, which is going to bound to put a number of people off unless we can bring down the cost of the equipment. Thank you. Okay, that's clearly a rhetorical question. Let me turn to you then, Federica. As I read it, something like 36% of all our CO2 emissions are coming from the building sector, and the vast majority of those are due to heating for space and hot water. Now, I suppose in the European heating industry, you would argue that there has been significant reductions achieved already because the technology has improved all the time, boilers and the like.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, certainly energy efficiency is a bit in the, I would say, the DNA of this industry. And throughout the years, this has really been the driver of innovation, energy efficiency, and also, supplying all types of buildings with energy efficient appliances. The reality of the market, however, is that these are technologies that are in your home, if you're looking at the residential sector, very, very long time. And you somehow forget, you as a consumer, me as a consumer, somehow forget about them unless something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, then you need a quick replacement, a quick solution, because when something goes wrong, it's probably winter, it's cold outside, and you need a quick fix. Which makes this replacement with much more efficient appliances, more complex appliances that require adaptation in the house very difficult. And in the study that we commissioned, we really looked, we really sent the data to look specifically at consumers that had changed their heating system in the past 5 years. So really to have a very concrete picture of people that had done that, so as to understand how this how this purchase decision is made. So I think the important thing for us to say is that technology is available. It's been developed, and I mean, of course, Giuseppe can talk about this even better than me, coming from a manufacturer directly. But I think technology is there. We have, you know, efficient, renewable-based technologies for really every climate, every type of building, every you know, energy infrastructure. The difficulty here is to make sure that you move the market faster, because our targets, our climate targets, are, you know, are time bound. So we have actually not a lot of time to replace what is in the market. And that's the first and biggest challenge that we have, to replace what is old and inefficient and is already installed in European people's houses.
I mean, you've set yourself, the industry has set itself a target of saying it wants to see a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030, which is now, you know, getting closer and closer, 8 or 9 years. I take it we're not on target. The European Union is not on target to achieve that reduction.
No, indeed, we need more ambition. If we are looking at the figures of today, we have a replacement rate of old and inefficient heaters of 4% on average in Europe annually. That's just too slow. That's too slow to reach the targets by 2050 and the intermediate, let's call it like this, intermediate targets by 2030. So what we've been saying is we need to accelerate that replacement rate. And there's a number of instruments there. We've mentioned some here, but there will be also the energy label, for example, in the picture, the energy performance of buildings. And here I'm talking obviously about regulation, but I think all of this has to play a role and has to really prioritize that replacement, because otherwise, if we don't have that more ambition, that ambition to go faster, we're risking really not getting to our targets.
Thanks, Federica. Paola, let me turn to you, European Commission. You've heard Federica talking about the need to raise ambitions, to accelerate and such like. So tell us, are you going to help? Are you going to bring about the achievement that is necessary?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Federica, for the invitation, for organizing this very timely event, really. We are very well aware of the fact, and it's been mentioned already, buildings represent 40% of the energy consumption in the EU, 36% of emissions. It's a no-brainer. We need to do something serious about the decarbonisation of buildings if we are really serious about the decarbonisation, about the 55% reduction of emissions by 2030. So it's clear that this is a central point to a number of the legislative proposals that are being put forward by the Commission, the famous Fit for 55 package, which was put forward last July, and which includes a number of provisions which are precisely aiming at the decarbonisation of buildings through different provisions. You will find, for instance, in the renewables, in the proposal for a renewables directive revision, a target, indicative target on the integration of renewables in the buildings. You will find provisions in the energy efficiency directive, of course. And we are now preparing in the very, very final stages prior to the adoption of the revision of the energy performance of buildings directive, which again has key provisions which are aimed at decarbonizing buildings. And of course, we cannot forget the eco-design delabeling provisions, and here specifically on space heaters, on water heaters. The work has started to revise the respective implemented and delegated acts. And we will actually be putting forward a call for evidence as early as next year, precisely to gather feedback from all of you in terms of what we should bear in mind when revising the space heaters, the water heaters. And this study is, of course, extremely interesting and a very good input to our ongoing work.
Thank you. This webinar discussion is principally about how we stimulate consumers and to bring about the change. And of course, the Commission can legislate at a European level, but really it's setting targets for member states, and it's the member states that are then going to introduce legislation which will be binding upon their consumers, and you've got to find ways of taking the progress forward according to their different national circumstances. Obviously, Finland is different from Greece. But when you're in your discussions with the member states, I mean, is there resistance? I mean, it's easy to say, let's achieve net zero by 2050. It's much more difficult if you're actually a politician saying, we're going to require people to spend more money on their heating. How's the discussion with member states on this legislation?
Yeah. It really also depends on what provisions within the legislation. It's clear, and member states don't like to be asked to reach targets. And national targets, for instance, is something that always creates some resistance, even though everybody agrees on the overall ambition, which is really to decarbonize. Then you have other type of legislation I mentioned already. Yeah, when we're talking about eco-design, and that's a different way of approaching the same problem, which is going about a structural decarbonization by reducing the emissions of the various appliances. And here it's in a way, I'd say easier, because you're really doing it through the appliances rather than putting obligations on member states directly. But this is also why you need all these instruments, and all of it needs to come together. And then you mentioned, Chris, and of course, and this is the central subject today, is the consumer. How does the consumer come in? And I really like to see the combination of these two instruments. On the one hand, the energy label, right, which will trigger consumer awareness, which will trigger consumer consciousness, but actually it will only completely seize the potential when linked with minimum energy performance for the different appliances, because it is those minimum energy performance which will then actually trigger the behavioral change. So we need all of this in order to really achieve the structural and societal change that we need to a gradual decarbonization.
Thank you. Giuseppe, Paola there talked about appliances. So you're speaking, of course, of the Ariston Group, but you're really also speaking on behalf of the industry as a whole. So has the manufacturing industry got the appliances that we need in order to bring about these emission reductions and keep us all warm?
Yeah, thanks. thanks, Chris, for the question. Allow me to give another interesting data before, by the way, because I think it is very striking and goes a bit in the direction that Paola mentioned already. In this, the study shows as well that there are two types of replacement of heating appliances that you can see in the market. Replacement because you want to replace your appliance, you feel that it's old, or you just moved in a new place, in a new apartment, you change it, and that's a kind of a planned replacement. There is the unplanned one as well. So there is an outage, the boiler or whatever the heating appliance is stops working, and you need to change it. Now, we were thinking that the data will show that in the first case, so when you do actually a planned replacement, the numbers of people switching from boilers to heat pumps would be considerably higher. And yet, and we were expecting that because of the data that Verle mentioned before, because people are genuinely interested in heating appliances which are efficient. And yet, she said already that it was 7.7%, the rate of switching from gas to heat pump. If you only take into account the people that did a planned replacement, that grows to 10%. So people that actually sat down and even talked with their installers, they don't seem to be moved. So of course there is a big issue there. Now I think, as manufacturers, of course, what we do, first of all, this is a very competitive landscape. The members of EHI, they compete very fiercely, And we are certain that this, of course, goes to the benefit of consumers, because that brings forward innovation, and that brings down cost reduction as well, wherever it is possible, of course, to make cost reductions. What we are doing as a company, but as an industry, is to try to optimize all the processes, try to optimize the supply chains. But at the moment is not exactly favorable to the optimization of the supply chains with all the mess that we see around us. But still, we are working very hard on that as an industry. We are working to optimize the downstream chain as well, if you wish. So going through distribution down to installers and then to the consumers. So there are different elements of this puzzle that I think the industry is really serious about, and it is working on. But I think, there is, of course, a role for regulation, as Paola mentioned several times. But I'd really like to repeat what Verle said at the beginning. There is a need for consistency. Now, just to use the examples that Paola brought up earlier on in the debate, she spoke about the eco-design and energy labeling, and she spoke about the Fit for 55 packages. By the way, both legislative initiatives that we support as an industry. And we are trying, of course, to work with the Commission and the other stakeholders on those points. For instance, we see that there are some inconsistencies there, because take the eco-design, there are efficiency limits for boilers, since we have been discussing about boilers so far, which are challenging, and the industry is going to work to be sure to meet those requirements, of course. On the other hand, in the Energy Efficiency Directive, for instance, there is a generic reference to fossil fuel combustion technology, which doesn't exist in real life. Combustion technology is combustion technology, and a boiler is as green as what you put into the boiler. So on the one hand, we see the Commission rightly putting for the industry challenging requirements in terms of efficiency of our products. On the other hand, we see the Commission sort of restricting the possibilities for member states that need to move away from much highly polluting systems. Think about coal. There are still coal stores, right?
Just let me break in there, because I want to hear a response from Paola to that, because you've directed that really directly at the Commission.
Yes, thank you, Giuseppe. Listen, and we are facing here some challenges, right? Because we know also we need to set the signals, the right signals, also in terms of investments, in terms of signals to the industry, and what is the pathway, and what is the ultimate end. And clearly, it's about developing the sustainable, clean technologies that we need for the decarbonization. On the other hand, we do have a transition that we need to cater for. And we do know that we cannot go overnight from the gas and in general the fossil fuel boilers to the most efficient heat pumps. So we need to have some sort of transition factored in, notably when it comes, for instance, for financial instruments. And Chris, also back to your question before, how do member states react? Very often they come back saying, okay, if you want us to do this, but how much does this cost? And we need support, and we need EU support, and we need the financial means which go with it. And so a number of our provisions also foresee the possibility, be it through state aid, be it through EU funds. And now we had, for example, the recovery and resilience plans, which are channeling a lot of money. And fortunately, member states embraced this possibility and have realized that there are financial means that can be addressed and can be used into really putting into motion this decarbonization. But again, it's not overnight. So we need to factor in this in the various legislative proposals. And in some, we can really say, okay, this is where we want to land. And in others, we'll have to say, but there is a transition to get there. So we'll be gradually phasing out the funding for less efficient boilers, for instance, but cannot be done overnight. So I wouldn't call it inconsistency, but really the need to factor in a transition and the acknowledgement that it will not happen overnight.
Let me throw, Giuseppe, I picked up your question and put it to Paola. Let me throw one at you. You mentioned competition between Ariston and other members of the European heating industry. Well, if there's competition, when are you going to get the price of heat pumps dramatically down? Because clearly, as the survey showed, inevitably, just common sense suggests that if the cost of heating, of buying new heating equipment is going to be substantially greater than the system people are using at the moment, there's going to be much resistance. So how much can do you anticipate these costs coming down over the next couple of years?
Yeah, and I'll try and give an answer, Chris. I'm not dodging the question, but just give me an element that ties back to the discussion that we were having with Paula. And thanks for the answer, Paula. And think about, for instance, hybrids. Hybrids are now becoming much more known. Also, we see, because we of course talk to installers, are becoming an option available into many markets, and clients like them. So the hybrid is the kind of innovation that, of course, I have in mind. There will be other sort of innovations as well. There are companies, not mine, that are working on micro CHP, for instance. There are companies that are working on thermally driven heat pump. My company is a leading player in that space, for instance. But hybrids is becoming now very much widespread, and it's being adopted very fast in some key markets, and mine as well. But again, I mean, think about a hybrid heat pump, by the way, for the public. It's basically a heat pump and a boiler that work together. We offer these things as factory made. So there is intelligence that ties the two elements together and that makes them work in a way that you can actually have you can have the sizing of the equipment done in a very, very precise manner for the space, for the apartment or house that you want to heat. And that actually would also, that sort of and sorry, and I forgot to mention, usually they work, let's say, in a ratio of 80% heat pump, and when it gets very cold, the gas condensing boiler kicks in and provides the extra.
You're answering my first question really here, Giuseppe, which is, has the industry got the technology to do it? But you're missing out. Go on, get back onto the costs. How much does all this cost?
I'm coming.
We're talking about the consumers here. We've got to encourage the consumers to replace old boilers with low emission systems. You've got to make it cheap enough for them to benefit from that.
I'm coming to the question. Don't worry, I'm coming to the question. But just to say, for instance, there are sort of midpoint solutions that are already today cheaper than the fully fledged heat pump that cannot be installed in every setting. So at the moment, there are solutions available, and it doesn't need necessarily to be a fully fledged, oversized heat pump. Can be something in the middle. Cost of heat pump. There is a lot of research going on, of course, and that as well, there is a need for consistency, and I will come back to the consistency issue in a while. The research points to the fact that actually there are two types of cost reduction that you can have. Of course, one is product cost reduction. The other one is non-product cost reduction. So there will be, unfortunately, bottlenecks in the supply chain, the materials being used. So there is nothing in our control. And unfortunately, there is nothing that we can do about it. Very much as Vestas cannot do anything about prices of wind turbines going up because there are supply chains shocks that reverberate through their products as well. But there are, of course, things that we can do, and there is a lot of innovation going on the materials being used, for instance, on the processes being used. It's like when Elon Musk talks about the factory, the robots that build machines, right? That's what he has in mind. Yeah. That's what we are doing as well as an industry. We are industrializing. We are scaling up these things. Scale is one thing, Chris, to reduce cost, for instance, that we need to mention. So there needs to be much more demand because that drives up the scales.
All right, let me stop. Good point. Federica, the survey that you carried out points to the key role of installers. So when we're talking about demand, obviously they have a huge influence upon this, and many of them, we're talking about heat pumps here, but we could be talking about I don't know, hydrogen or alternative systems altogether. I mean, the installers simply don't seem to have the training at the moment. What are you calling for?
Yeah, so here we need both numbers, so we need both quantity and quality. That's the bottom line. First of all, we are seeing, and we're trying to dig more into this, but we are seeing that this is a profession that is not calling a lot more young people to it. So we don't have enough installers, and also to handle this wave that is already happening now of replacements. We don't have enough of them to hold it. If you are now trying to take an appointment with an installer, you're going to get it probably in March next year. That's what happened to me actually now. So unless it's an emergency, otherwise they just are overwhelmed. There's too much work. That means there's a shortage of installers first, and then there's simply new skills that are necessary now to install new systems. The new systems involve a level of digitalization skills, so digital skills, because these systems are smart. They have, they are connected with a smart control, and they can talk with the grid, and they can talk with the consumer in the house. So you need that level of skills, which, whatever, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when they got the first training, was not there. There's simply new technologies. There's innovation for whether, heat pumps have been around for quite some time, but it's still an innovative product for a lot of the installers. Handling F-gases is also not done by everybody. We know that, for example, in Italy, only 30% of the installers are certified to work with renewable energy-based systems, only 30%. So there's both a question of numbers and a question of giving that outlook to the future profession, and a question of upgrading the skills. And just last about this, one of the barriers there for installers seems to be that tendentially you have very small companies there, maximum five people. And the trend again in Italy is towards a fragmentation. There's more companies, but they have a smaller number of employees, which means that you either go for a training or you go work. If you go work, you earn money. If you go training, you don't earn money. So that got us, the double sword on the one hand, getting training for the future and earning your money for the month is a problem.
Who's responsible for bringing about a change in the training of installers? Is that not the industry? Is that not the manufacturers who should be doing it?
That's actually both private and public, in the sense that you need, like you go to school for, coming to work here or in the commission, you need to go to school to be an installer. It's a specialized school. So, and that part is something that is organized in every country in a different way. It can be, a regional, a land, it can be a national education issue. And then, of course, training and retraining is, of course, massively done by the industry. We do train our installers, not our installers, as the installers, but of course, that we same problem that I was mentioning before. You either go to get trained in innovation or not. And of course, it's easy if you keep doing all the same to offer all the same products. So that's a real barrier, and it can neither fall on the shoulders of the manufacturers. Neither, I would say, on the shoulders of the public administration, but it really needs to be a strategy that links the national level, the energy, let's say, strategies and decarbonization strategies with the education and training strategies at European level, at national level, at land or whatever regional level.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, we're just over halfway through the webinar, so just let me say that you've just been listening to Federica Sabati, the Secretary General of the European Heating Industry, and she's joined by her colleague, Vele Dilets, the Head of Technology at the EHI. She laughs because I mispronounce her name, as too often. You've been hearing from Giuseppe Loribio from Ariston Group, Public Affairs Director, and Paolo Pina from the European Commission, Director at DG Energy. Paolo, coming back to you, you've heard from the results of the survey that Vele mentioned earlier on, and the fact that the energy labels just don't seem to be having as much effect as many of us hoped they would have. And indeed, EHI has called for quite significant reforms in the way in which energy labeling takes place. How is the Commission responding to that?
Okay, well, Chris, if you allow me, because I'm really, really tempted by the issue of the role of the installers. If you allow me just to a word on that, because
how can I refuse? Go on.
Thank you. I was really struck by the study that we're looking into today. When and Veerle mentioned this, 97% of consumers replied that they either completely or to some extent follow the professional advice. Now, what I found interesting about this is that now if you combine this with the fact that apparently 28% of those consumers also said that they were not aware of options because the installers did not propose it. Now you see the impact this may have. So we really cannot underestimate the role that installers have. And here I would really, really like to put forward this challenge to the industry. And Federica, you already addressed this. It's not a role of the manufacturers, or is only to some extent. I would really like to see the manufacturers, the competitors, coming together and pooling resources and training them together and say, we will come together because it is in our interest to have installers across the EU who have the capacity, the skills, the competence, and that we have enough number for this to happen. Since I took up these functions, I've been questioning and asking around who of people I meet ever considered installing a heat pump. And believe it or not, among the most that I found who were actually willing to install such a heat pump, they told me we weren't able to do so because we didn't find the installer who would do so, who would know how to do it. Now, this is a problem that you industry have a real interest in addressing. And we've putting in terms of commission, yes, we're trying to put the regulatory framework, we're trying to put the instruments for the consumer to be able to have the information to make this choice, and not always to the level that we'd like, and I'll come back to your question, Chris. But there's also for you a role, not just to produce the products, but really to make sure that there will be the necessary workforce to install it, to repair it, and to actually respond to the demand. This is a real issue. This is a real issue. On the label,
just Giuseppe, you will get a chance, I promise. Right. So, Paola, the label, yes, indeed.
The label, we do know, and the label has been a living body, as you know, and we've been looking at the labels. We've just gone through a big rescaling exercise because we had at some point for various appliances, you remember the A+, A++, A++. So clearly there was a need to revisit that, to make it simpler and to also reflect the evolution of the technologies available. So clearly we do not see the label as a static issue. We need to make it sure that the label can reflect the existing technologies. So for instance, an example is precisely the rescaling. Another one now, as part of the space heaters, the water heaters, and the revision that we're doing, we're also looking at the label. And you know that some stakeholders have come up with the idea of a double scale for space heaters, for instance, whereas others will say, no, we absolutely need one scale only. For us, at the end of the day, I mean, we need to look at the end consumer of these labels, which is the citizen, which is the consumer. So the simpler it is, the better. And we need to make enough publicity about it. And we need to also make sure that those who can be the agents of these labels, and we come back again to, for instance, the installers, also make use of it. But in a nutshell, just to say that we evolve as we see fit, and the labels and the labeling policy hasn't been static.
Thank you, thank you. Veerle, just to turn, you're head of technology with the European heating industry. We can get very easily sucked into just concentrating on heat pumps all the time, but there's other potential systems, you know, depending on the location, depending on the building, depending on the power supply, pipelines and such like. So what other technologies are around which people might wish to consider as we move into a low emission direction?
Mm-hmm. And it was, thank you, Chris, for the question. And I think Giuseppe already mentioned it shortly. Yeah? So we have a whole range of products that could, be future-proof. Today, we have gas heating appliances that are already functioning with 100% biomethane. We already have liquid fuel-driven products that can work with bioliquid fuels. We're working on developing more and more hydrogen appliances. So we have a range ready that is future-proof. And amongst those technologies, we have we call heat pumps. And for us, heat pumps, it does not only mean electric heat pumps, but we're also talking about thermally driven heat pumps, which are also very interesting in some applications. We have the hybrid heat pumps, which Giuseppe explained earlier on. We also have the micro CHPs, also very efficient and also very good because they produce electricity when the demand is already high. So, I mean, each of these technologies have their own their own benefits in certain applications. And of course, we still have our condensing boilers, which are also made future-proof in case there is a demand for it.
Well, your industry association's target is a 60% reduction by 2030 in emissions. I mean, okay, there's this huge, great range of technologies, but is there a silver bullet? I mean, what do you think is going to emerge as the leader? What's going to transform the situation in the next 8 or 9 years?
The silver bullet, I think nobody in the heating industry believes that there is one silver bullet. I mean, in our opinion, to ensure that the energy system is resilient, to make sure that there is a system efficiency, there's a need for more than one energy carrier. We're talking about not only electricity, but also solid fuels. We're talking about green gases, green liquid fuels. So the whole range of fuels that are available now can be decarbonized and can be used for future heating technologies. Sorry, I lost my. Yeah, it's
okay. It's okay. I mean, there is no silver bullet, is there?
No,
we come back onto Federica's early comments that one way or another, across the board, we have to raise our ambitions and accelerate. And Federica, one of the issues is money here. And I know you've touched in EHI has touched in papers upon member states using better use of the auction revenues from the emissions trading system. And Paolo, I throw that one at you, really. I mean, you know, a couple of years ago, the price of carbon allowances was €4. Now it's the best part of €60. I mean, national governments have got a lot more money in their coffers, which they could be devoting to supporting the transformation of our heating systems. Is the ETS one of those instruments where you're telling member states, you know, you've got the money, tell your finance ministers to allocate some of it for this purpose? Absolutely,
Chris, and thank you, because this gives me also the opportunity to mention a very specific proposal within the set of proposals last July. You know that we are proposing to extend the ETS to buildings and to transport, and so a separate ETS mechanism for buildings, so the heating in buildings and transport. And because we know this will trigger costs and precisely also at the current cost of carbon, big costs, but it will also mean very many revenues for the member states. And we came forward with a proposal to create a climate social fund, which is precisely consisting of part of the revenues which would be stemming from the extension of the ETS to buildings and transport, that part of those revenues is used to allow for investments in decarbonization of buildings, in helping those who are most vulnerable and who would need support, because we do know that these are costly. These appliances, you mentioned the cost of heat pumps, for instance, it's not anyone who can afford it. So that really we are giving the signals and also allowing for the means to be used for this purpose. And the Climate Social Fund foresees this explicitly, this obligation for member states to use part of it into investments and to some extent also income support for those who most need it, but essentially for investments in energy efficiency and decarbonization of buildings.
Okay, thank you. I should just mention at this point that we're having a number of comments sent in on the chat system here on Zoom. I'm not sure if we'll get the chance to put them to the panelists, but if not, those comments will be circulated to the members here, and you may well get an individual response. So by all means, please keep them coming. They will be of interest. Just looking back at the consumer issues and how we encourage consumer change, Federica, you've talked about building renovation passports. What are those?
Well, I didn't specifically talk about it. I think this is something that is happening within the Commission realm, but certainly it's something that that is interesting. I think what is interesting for us is indeed to have a comprehensive system in which you have, on the one hand, and a consistent system, which you have on the one hand, the product that has an effective label that gives an instrument to the consumer, but on the other hand, that also there is that trigger at the moment that you have, for example, the renovation of a building, yeah, or when you are planning to have a renovation, and in that sense, I think the energy performance of buildings can help driving that replacement of old and inefficient heating systems towards new efficient ones, if it can have that element of heating, let's say, engraved in it. Yeah, so when we are looking at an energy performance of building directive that we think can have an impact in changing this market, it is something that gives clearly, that includes heating as such into its provisions, so that the consumer, the end user, us, can actually act upon an information that is being given to us again as consumers. Yeah. Myself as a consumer, because I think in heating, one of my experiences is that everybody has actually an opinion, certainly at a certain, from a certain age onwards, when you start having your own home or when you start renovating it, then you have a personal experience that drives very much, it's a good indication of what actually happens in the market overall. So, I change house, or I buy a new house, or I rent a new house, I have a piece of information. And I have also perhaps an incentive specifically looking at decarbonizing and getting a more efficient heating system in it. So that's really important to give a complete picture to the end users.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question? I'm not sure, to all of you really, are there any examples around Europe? Are there any particular member states that you think are taking the lead, where perhaps the Commission is borrowing ideas from them because they're giving examples of best practice? Who are the leaders in Europe on this issue?
I don't know if Giuseppe has ideas. The Italian market is very dynamic.
Yeah, I might. Well, the thing is, of course, I can talk at length about Italy, but I do think Italy is a good case in point because there is a massive program which is financed off the Recovery and Resilience Facility that Paola mentioned beforehand. So there is a lot going on in Italy at the moment about a big renovation push that looks both at the insulation of the building and at the system, at the technical systems. And we think as an industry, of course, that the two must go hand in hand, because otherwise also some solutions, if you do not renovate fully the building, you might not necessarily get you cannot necessarily fit the right technology into that building. So for sure, Italy could be a good case in point in the discussion. But I don't know. I mean, I'm certain that Paola has many more ideas, because she speaks daily about these things with member states.
Do you have a comment, Paola?
Well, since it's about speaking about good examples, I can name some countries indeed. Listen,
as a former parliamentarian, I always like name and shame. Personally,
I know.
I like to know who are the bad ones.
Depends on the purpose. In this case, I'm happy to refer to some good examples, and there I would think of Denmark. I would think of France, Germany. These, for instance, these member states announced that they want to have no longer fossil fuel boilers installed in new buildings over the next decade. So that was very clear announced plan. Some countries have already almost ended their transition away from fossil fuel-based heating, for instance, Sweden. Others are well advanced, Denmark, for instance, Austria. So indeed, there are some countries which are paving the way and showing that this is possible. Now, I also have to say, for the benefit and in defense of many others who are not as advanced, that the point of departure is very different, right? And we're not all starting from the same level of decarbonization of the heating system. So, and I think we need to acknowledge that. But we always need to look at those who are performing best, and clearly these are some of the countries I would mention here.
Giuseppe,
may I jump in?
Well, can I just, I'll feed another question to you, but answer both, make your point and answer this. There's obviously going to be great market opportunities for the industry. It might be difficult with consumers, but one way or another, the renovation has got to take place. So you're going to be potentially manufacturing and selling a lot of new products. I suppose the question is really, if we look at the history of the past, we know, for example, with solar panels, European industry got decimated by Chinese competition. Are we going to stay? Do we have a leadership role in this sector in Europe, and can we retain that leadership role if we have it?
I think we do on so many products. And by the way, hybrids that I mentioned beforehand is one such example. The European manufacturers are really at the front of that conversation. And now I don't want to do publicity and shameless self-promotion, but for instance, my own company is investing a lot in the so-called gas absorption heat pumps, which is a specific type of thermally driven heat pumps. So there is a lot of innovation going into these kind of products. And the idea behind is just like you say, Chris, we want to protect our home turf as well. We want to be sure that our industrial facilities in Europe, because we manufacture in Europe, will stay there and will not be moved elsewhere. But also I wanted to mention another point, which I think Italy is a good case in point for heat pumps, for instance. Heat pumps, of course, if you move from a gas boilers to a heat pump, you will have no gas bill anymore, probably, and you will have a very high electricity bill. Italy used to have a system of network tariff, which was based on the more you consume, the more you pay. Then all of a sudden, because of the push of the industry, they realized, and when I say they, is the government and the regulator, that system, which dated back to the oil shock, made no sense whatsoever in a world where you've got renewable electricity and heat pumps. So nowadays, for instance, you do not have the kilowatt hour costing more if you consume more electricity. That is, for instance, another good example, which is going to support the heat pump business. But there is one thing that I think I need to stress that goes back to the point that Paula mentioned about the installers. Of course, I mean, installers is a key topic, and we know that is a key topic. I am not quite certain that we can actually go in the direction of like pooling our resources together, because this is a competitive business, like I said. And I mean, we need still, companies also see a competitive advantage in the installers, because, they know our products, they have our know-how. So we need to be very conscious as well about the landscape that we are in. And to go back to another point which was mentioned that I like very much, the label. For instance, the data from the study that we are presenting today shows that the people indeed actually trust their installers. So if there was this famous double scale on the label and people went to the installer for advice, we are certain that the installer will be able to, translate the complexity or the perceived complexity of the label towards the customers. You've got a middleman that you need to trust that can do that work for you. It's a bit like in other sectors what price comparison tools do, for instance, just to give another example of a totally different nature.
I wonder, Federica, just on this issue of installers, is there a role here for EHI? I mean, this as Giuseppe's just been saying, on the one hand, there's competition, because obviously you have installers who are dedicated to basically buying that company's products. But there's obviously the wider need for training of installers, who are prepared to advise consumers as to what is best for their circumstances. You have presumably have a coordinating role here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we as the EHI, we represent the manufacturers. So, and there is actually as such not an organization of installers. There's many bits and pieces of organizations that deal with electrical ones, with bathroom ones, with construction. So that coordinating role is probably at the moment not really, yeah, let's say easy to do. But I think there are actually, this is a priority for us. We just released a paper about how to roll out heat pumps as such, and what are the barriers and how to overcome them. And indeed, amongst the, let's say, 4 main barriers that we see, there is the one of installers. So we are very well aware this is a topic, and we are certainly interested in pushing it forward. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity for sure. So I think we can certainly expect that the industry will take part of that role because it is in our interest. There are a lot of our companies that have already, it's not like they're not doing anything, they have been doing a lot. There are, for example, partnerships between a company and a local or national university, technical university, or institutes, academies that train. So partnership, public-private partnerships, money that the industry is putting forward to train people in those technologies that are new already at, before the retraining. So this is already somehow happening. But we also have to, like the Commission says, it's not our responsibility because it's not Europe, it's Europe, and it's not, and we are Europe, and this is a national thing or a regional thing. So, it's the ball that keeps jumping everywhere. But I think it's really actually a common interest, and it's really part of the responsibility of the industry, but it's part of the responsibility of public administrations. And if nothing else, Europe needs to give a clear signal to public administrations. Let's do this in your programs for training. Let's give a clear indication. It's nobody else will do it. Let's not bounce this ball. We all have an interest in it. That's really clear, and it's certainly a priority. Certainly, if you want to roll out more heat pumps like we do. Okay. And to make just one definition precision. There are no fossil fuel boilers. There are fossil fuels, and there are boilers. Technologies are not fossil unless you find them in some, cave or so. They are not fossil. There are technologies that work with certain types of fuels, gases that can be green or not green. But the fossil fuel part is a fuel, and the boilers is a boiler, and let's not mix them, because otherwise we have a very distorted picture of where we need to go. So fossil fuels have a decreasing role in the energy transition to 2050, and technologies that can work with renewable sources have a role to play in the transition, because otherwise we don't get there. Let's remember, on the topic of electrification, the European Commission long-term strategy for decarbonizing the whole economy gives only 34% of direct electrification in buildings in 2050. What are we going to do with the rest of those buildings that are not electrified? This is why we need all the renewable sources of energy that we can, and we need a reduction of energy demand. And all of this together will play a role. There's no silver bullet, there's no single solution, I'm afraid.
And time is so short if we're to meet the ambitions you've set yourself, and which the European Union has set itself. Paola, a quick last word. There you are. I hope you're not planning on taking any holidays for the next 8 years. What do you need to help you deliver?
Well, the good thing, Chris, is we're really not alone here. The Commission cannot be left alone on this, and this discussion has shown it. We need the industry, we need the consumers, we need the experts, we need the national authorities. So thank God, I will probably have less holidays, but this will be a common feature with all of those who will be engaged really into the decarbonization. And there's really a role for everyone. Giuseppe, I can't resist. your argument on the competing industries and the training of the installers, that was the argument of the car industry before we liberalized the spare parts. And now you can repair your car wherever you go, and you do not have to go to the BMW stand if you have a BMW. So you need to find another argument. I'm not convinced. Thank you very much on our side.
Thank you, and thank you. I need to bring this to an end. So thank you very much. You've just been hearing from Paola Pino, Director at DG Energy for Energy Efficiency and Innovation. You've heard from Giuseppe Lorubio from the Ariston Group, Director of Public Affairs and speaking on behalf of the industry. You've heard from Vela Bilets from the European heating industry, and from Federica Sabatti, the Chief Secretary General of the European heating industry. Very final word from you, Federica. If you've got a couple of wish lists or suggestions for the Commission, what are they? You've gone mute. We managed to avoid that.
Yes.
Final word from you.
I think heating is important for our energy performance of buildings. So let's not forget how that can play a role. The second thing, let's think there's a number of technologies that can support that. Let's use the multi-technology approach that we can have. Industry is European, it's a European outlet. It's both good for climate, it's good for the economy. And finally, let's also look at working together at an energy label that can help effectively consumers to take part in this energy transition. I think these would be my 3 messages.
Thank you, and thank you all for taking part. Thank you for being watching. Keep warm this winter, keep your emissions down. All the very best to you.
Thank you.